mandate. Let's have a little look at some of this morning's other headlines. Lettice Bromovsky joins us, a political commentator and contributor to Young Voices UK. Good morning, Lettice.
Good morning, Callum. Happy New Year.
And Happy New Year to you. Goodness me, yes, I should be saying that today, shouldn't I? Lovely to have you on. Right, we'll come back to some of the COVID issues in just a few minutes, but I do want to touch on the cost of living crisis. The Times this morning, a third of voters expect their energy bills to become unaffordable this year, increasing the pressure on Boris Johnson to protect against the rising cost of living. Now, the Times, of course, always writes well, but we should pay attention to the fact it's worded like that. A third of voters, and when something like a cost of living crisis starts hitting people this personally and this directly, that is when electoral pressure starts to ramp up, isn't it?
Yes, no, definitely. And as we are seeing the May elections creeping ever closer, I believe that some voters, we've had a lot of scandals, a lot of Tory sleaze this year, but some of that I feel could almost be forgotten, wallpaper scandal or a wine and cheese party. But when it comes to voters, if they are really seeing, estimates that will top £2,000 a year for their energy bills, that sort of level of unaffordability will not really be tolerated, I don't think. There was a great article, I can't remember which newspaper it was, that came out from Lord Frost, which basically said that Boris is at risk of losing the next election unless he sorts this out soon with things like lower taxes or cuts to VAT. And as you said, a third of voters expecting their energy bills to be unaffordable. That's a huge number of voters. So Johnson definitely does have to do something to bring these bills down, and soon.
Yeah, so in terms of how to do that, so most people want money, taxpayers' money, to be used to offset rises in gas and electricity. The government's being urged by Labour to scrap VAT on fuel. Bills could top £2,000 a year from April, so talks to be held with Rishi Sunak, the Chancellor, and Kwasi Kwarteng, the Business Secretary. I suppose there's two things I want to ask here, Lettice, kind of on the same theme. One is clearly it's going to be a real struggle for households, for families to afford this. Similarly, as we look back on how much money has been spent by the government on the pandemic and on various measures throughout the pandemic, can the government afford this either? This is an absolute nightmare, isn't it, trying to find money to offset these dramatic rises?
Yes, no, and it definitely is going to be a tricky conversation. As you said, the PM and the Chancellor will be holding talks this week to try and sort it out. But let's not forget that when Boris was back in the day a leading Brexiteer, one of his promises was that if we left the EU, he would cut VAT from our gas and electricity bills. And obviously hasn't done that yet, but I think this would be the perfect time to do this. Help and support these families that are struggling to pay their household bills. I mean, households for these families are turning into these sort of money pits with higher mortgage rates, these spiraling energy bills, tax increases from April, including your national insurance tax going up by 1.5%, council taxes expected to rise. There's a huge amount of money that people will have to pay in this following year. And I also think it's very interesting and rather strange that we're hearing Labour calling for cutting taxes while the Tories are here implementing them and enforcing higher taxes.
Let's go on then to have a little look. We mentioned Rishi Sunak, the Chancellor. He is apparently backing the call for COVID isolation to be cut to 5 days. Apparently the majority of the Cabinet are said to be in favour. This is, of course, to try to address rising staffing shortages across the NHS and elsewhere as well. Does it feel like this has clearly become a focal point in terms of trying to alleviate staffing issues? But it was only so recently that it was cut to 7 days. And even when that happened, there was a bit of kind of concern scientifically about whether that was the right thing to do in terms of isolating. I suppose at some point, Lettice, we want isolation to be 0 days, don't we? It becomes something like if you are ill with something else, you kind of self-regulate and say, actually, I'm too ill to go to work. But I mean, is now the time for that? Does it feel like we're rushing these things?
This all really comes as part of the government's move to start living with COVID. As you said just a moment ago, Naheem Zahawi said that the UK should become the pioneer of living with COVID. And I think on the whole, I'm very much in favour of this. As you said, we're having this staffing shortage with people who are, in some cases, obsessively testing themselves every day when they aren't feeling ill or they're asymptomatic, and they're finding out they have COVID. And because of this, they are missing work, which is leading to staffing shortages in many sectors, particularly in our key areas such as the NHS. But we are seeing COVID cases fall for the 5th day in a row, suggesting that we are past our peak. And something which is also part of this is the free lateral flow scheme, which is free for everyone, but it comes at a cost. And that cost is around £6 billion at the moment. So I want to know sort of at what point will we stop treating this like a pandemic and move to it being more like an endemic, which is what it is.
Let us look as well then, as we're on the subject of COVID, I suppose, the vaccine mandate in the NHS. This has caught my eye this morning because of warnings from a London hospital boss basically saying that 1,000 members of staff may end up disappearing, leaving his trust because of the vaccination mandate. So this is the Chief Exec of King's College Hospital NHS Trust, Professor Clive Kay, saying that he's trying to encourage staff to come forward for vaccination to avoid redeploying or losing them. But it could be 1,000 people. And I just wonder, Lettice, the arguments for and against vaccine mandates, the idea is to try to encourage people to actually get the vaccine. We've just talked about a staffing crisis. The NHS was having a bit of a staffing crisis before the pandemic even came along. And this could actually exacerbate it. I mean, somebody's going to be proved right eventually when the mandate kicks in the 1st of April. Should we heed warnings like this? How should we respond to warnings like this?
Yeah, I mean, there is no doubt that this will exacerbate the staff shortages we're already seeing. I am definitely opposed to mandatory jabs. I'm sure you might have already seen, but Sajid Javid was recently filmed in talking to one of these doctors who was not vaccinated himself. And he was saying that he had recently, or maybe not recently, but he had recovered from COVID essentially. And he was regularly checking his antibodies. And that was providing him with a better protection than having the vaccine. We have to remember that just because you have the vaccine or even the booster, you won't necessarily not contract the virus. I've had a few friends actually since New Year's who are double jabbed and they are boosted and they have still caught COVID. So this isn't some, end all that once you have the booster, you'll be okay. And I think that the risk that we're seeing from the immense NHS backlog is a worse risk than having a few NHS staff who don't want to get the vaccine.
Lettice, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for your thoughts this morning. Nice to speak to you.
No problem.
We'll catch you again soon. That is Lettice Bromovsky, political commentator and contributor to Young Voices UK.